bill expanding the use of highway license plate readers is moving forward for further discussion.
Now, supporters of the program say it's helped solve crimes and locate missing people, but opponents raise privacy concerns about government surveillance itself. As of mid-March, about 140 cameras had been installed, and the system has recorded more than 150 million license plate scans. The program has been run by the SBI since 2023, and House Bill 206 would allow the program to continue permanently. Some civil liberties groups oppose the long-term tracking records of drivers' movements. In a statement on the extension of the program, an attorney for the ACLU said, "What begins as a tool to find missing persons or recover stolen vehicles can gradually expand into broader intelligence gathering, informal information sharing, political monitoring, and other uses." The bill has now been assigned to the Senate Rules Committee. It would need approval from both legislative chambers to be considered by Governor Josh Stein.